Welcome, everyone. I'm Lynn Barrett, President of the Board of Vermont Independent Media, publisher of the Commons. We're very excited tonight to welcome Representative Becca Balint, who will be joining us in just a few minutes. We're planning 2 other Voices Live discussions this spring and fall. Next up will be homelessness in April, and we're going to be doing it at the library. Following that, we're going to be doing opioid use disorder in May. And then coming in the fall, we're going to be focusing on democracy prior to the election. So I think, as everybody knows, tonight's subject is housing, such an important issue. So we've actually extended the Zoom to do a panel discussion following Becca's appearance. Tonight, we're planning for many questions. So we're going to ask you to please put your questions in the chat and we will get to you. Becca has been very generous and is allowing a lot of time for questions and answers. Now, let me introduce award-winning writer for Vermont Business Magazine and the Commons, Joyce Marcel. Take it away.
Thank you, Lynn. Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many of you here. Now, the topic tonight is housing. I know we all have a lot of topics we'd like to talk to Becca about, but we're going to stick to housing. So, first of all, housing, as we know it, is a national problem. It's not a Brattleboro problem. And the solutions are many. In Brattleboro, we are wrestling with why are we in this mess and does it even matter? Or what do we do about Act 250? Is it hindering housing construction? Should we protect Act 250, which is the Land Use Protection Act? What kind of housing do we want? High-end, affordable, Section 8? Do we want houses? Do we want apartments? Are they in the village centers or in the fields? What are we talking about? Who qualifies for them? Housing for seniors, a very big issue all of a sudden. I'm a senior now and I'm living out in the middle of the woods on a dirt road. This is not going to be viable in another 10 years. Where do I go? There's no place in town. What about NIMBY? Not in my backyard, folks who don't like change. And change is frightening. We all know that. But we're seeing it in Massachusetts where they passed a law saying that construction should begin in centers of towns, and some towns are rebelling against that law. And we're seeing in Putney, I think it's the 4th time they brought the Windham
Windsor region.
Thank you, Becca. Why don't you take it away, Becca? Is Airbnb really a question? Is it an issue? Or my favorite question of all, do we just let the boomers die and then there'll be lots of housing? There'll be a glut. It's an issue, and we've got a lot to say about it. And I think the first person we're going to talk to is Becca Balint, who is a mom, a teacher, a progressive leader who comes, I read this right off your website, comes to Washington ready to fight for working families. Becca is the first woman and openly LGBTQ person to represent her home state of Vermont. Surprise, surprise, she's running for re-election. As the daughter of a working class mother and an immigrant father, Becca is deeply committed to defending American democracy and protecting vulnerable communities. She has just introduced a housing bill, which she is going to explain first, and I think you should go into some detail about it. So go ahead.
Thank you so much, Joyce. And thank you to Vermont Independent Media and Brattleboro Community Television for helping to pull this great event together. So good evening. I know many of you know me, but for those of you who are meeting me for the first time, I'm Congresswoman Becca Balint, and I represented Windham County in the Vermont State Legislature for many years, and now I represent all of Vermont in the U.S. House of Representatives. And I live in Brattleboro, and I'm joining you, though, tonight from my office in D.C. And as I was telling Joyce and Lynn, I've got 2 staff members sitting next to me taking careful notes to make sure between the 3 of us, we won't miss any of the feedback that we're going to get on tonight's call. So I'm very excited to have this dialogue about one of the most pressing issues facing Vermonters, our housing crisis. And I hear about the shortage of housing from Vermonters in every corner of the state. And it's very important to me and my whole team to work together to find solutions. And as Joyce, as you said, there isn't just one solution. It's going to take moving many levers at once. So last month, I introduced the Community Housing Act. It's federal legislation designed to tackle some of the biggest barriers to addressing our housing crisis, both in Vermont and, of course, nationally, since it is a federal bill. And we are trying to offer some creative solutions and some very big investments. So it's hundreds of billions of dollars in housing investments, nearly $500 billion. And it is that big because that's what's needed. Vermont is feeling it acutely. Other states like New York and California also feeling it acutely. But pretty much every congressional district across the nation is dealing with a housing shortage. The estimate is that we are short over 3 million additional units of housing in order to meet the demand. That's because housing, as you all know, it sits at the nexus of so many of the challenges that we face in our communities, whether it's the national workforce crisis, the crushing income disparity, the devastating mental health crisis, our struggles with the opioid epidemic. We know that creating more housing is a key component to the solutions. And as I said, Vermonters know that we're in the middle of an acute crisis here. Despite the great work that was done in the legislature, both when I was there and after I left, we did invest millions of dollars, both state and federal dollars, into creating more housing, but we still have a lot more to do. I hear from Vermonters constantly that they can't find housing. They're worried that their kids and their grandkids aren't going to be able to stay in the state. And with some of the highest rates of homelessness per capita in the country, we need the power and the resources of the federal government to help. We don't have enough money in Vermont alone to help tackle that issue. So I always like to ground the conversation in the fact that housing is the foundation upon which all of our lives are built. We have to have access to safe housing because it offers working families stability and opportunities that they need in order to succeed in whatever line of work they want to be in. It gives stability to kids. And I have 2 kids, a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old. I want to make sure they have a safe and secure home so they can thrive in school. It offers the ability for workers to move from one part of Vermont to another to get better opportunities. If the housing isn't there, that's holding them back. And of course, when we look at the mental health crisis and treatment of substance use disorder, safe, secure housing is completely at the center of getting people the health that everyone needs and deserves. So it's not just in our cities and our population centers, and that's something that's important about this bill. It's offering some solutions for rural areas as well. We know that rural Vermonters are also seeing that not only is there a reduction in housing stock because of the influx coming from pandemic and post-pandemic, but so much of our housing stock is old. Across the country, we've also seen skyrocketing rents because we have some predatory landlords and hedge funds buying up houses and rentals and then essentially price fixing, which I can talk a little bit more about later. So I'm very proud to have introduced this package, but I also know it is not, it's not all inclusive. We really want to get the feedback from all of you as well. But a big part of the bill is community-based housing, which is why we're calling it the Community Housing Act. It would increase the supply of affordable and deeply affordable housing. And we have some provisions in here to help keep renters in their home and keep rents affordable for the long term. And you also talked about zoning issues in Act 250. We are really trying to incentivize eliminating the barriers to increasing the supply of housing. We've also included massive investments in the Housing Trust Fund to tap into the land trust model and shared equity model, because again, we don't just need short-term solutions. We need housing that is going to be affordable over the long term. It also does something important in that it increases a fee that is assessed on the work that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac do, and that additional fee will go directly into the Housing Trust Fund. So we have a stable source of income going forward, and it will provide grants to states like Vermont to produce and preserve housing for low and very low income families. The rural specific programs are also important for keeping Vermonters housed. As we know, rural America is often left behind. So we have to make investments at the federal level that are not just geared towards population centers. So just looking over, I want to make sure I don't get too far in the weeds because we'll get into it later. These investments are helping individuals and families, but we know that making investments in housing also help communities as a whole. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you here tonight. That's why I'm here, to hear directly from you. I know government works best when we are in constant dialogue with our constituents. And as I said, my team is right next to me here, and we have been working on this bill for months, but it's still a work in progress. We want your feedback, and we want to hear specifically, what are you seeing and experiencing in the housing market? And what else could we do at the federal level to help address our housing crisis? The other piece, before I turn it back over to you, Joyce, I wanted to let you know there are some national organizations that have endorsed the bill: the National Low Income Housing Coalition, the National Neighbor Works Association, the Grounded Solutions Network, our local, both Windham and Windsor Housing Trust and Champlain Housing Trust, the Housing and Homeless Alliance of Vermont, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, and the Center for Law and Policy and Social Policy have all endorsed the legislation. But again, I'm looking very much forward to hearing from all of you on the call. And let's open it up, Joyce.
Okay, before we open it up, everybody go away. No, we're getting good questions. I just need some specific idea of what we're talking about here. I mean, how is this going to, what are we talking about? I mean, it's easy to say that, but what's actually going to happen?
Okay. So let's put some dollar amounts on this. So people can, so we have something in Congress called the Housing Trust Fund. Okay. And it grants money to states to produce and preserve low and very low income housing. Okay. And we are wanting to invest $450 billion in the Housing Trust Fund. And a lot of times in Congress, you worry about what's the long-term solution for funding something like that you need to have a constant influx of cash to be able to grant out to states to build more housing. And so I touched on it in the opening. We have proposed in this bill to increase a financial fee on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which would set aside additional money per fee that would then flow into the Housing Trust Fund. So we'd have this constant influx of cash to be able to grant out to states for them to be able to build more what we call affordable and deeply affordable. We also invest $150 billion in the Capital Management Fund, and this helps community development financial institutions and giving them money to focus on low-income communities to help finance loans that support affordable housing. So there are many, many parts of the bill, but the top line is there are essentially three buckets in the bill to make huge investments to increase the supply of housing. Okay, because we know the housing market from top to bottom is short millions of units. So there are many, many provisions in here to literally increase the supply of housing. Then we have rental supports in this bill to keep people housed when they may be struggling to pay rent. So we look at the ERAP program, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, that was very successful during the pandemic, and we want to make that permanent. We want there to be a permanent fund to assist people in keeping housed when they come up short on their rent, so that we can give direct rental assistance. We also provide in here eviction protection grants. So again, there's the building more housing, there is provisions to keep people housed, and then the last bucket is looking specifically at how do we increase housing availability for rural renters. So those are the three big buckets. There's a lot within there. I did touch on one piece that I thought folks would find interesting about how you have some price fixing going on across the country with rental units. Many larger housing investors, they use an algorithm called RealPage. And what it does, it allows them to price fix rental prices across a huge area of land, which of course makes it very difficult for people to feel like they're in any kind of a competitive market. So what we would do is we would charge HUD with making a database that landlords would have to send their information to so that we can keep track through our antitrust work to make sure they're not price fixing. So there's pages and pages. It's a very big bill. There's lots in it, and would love to dive deep on anything that people are interested in. The other piece that we think is new in this bill that we're excited about is charging HUD and the Health and Human Services Division to come together to create a task force to figure out how do we coordinate getting people substance use disorder treatment when they're in affordable housing, because there are limitations to what can be done in terms of medical interventions in housing, and we feel like that has been a barrier which has prevented people from staying housed. So very excited about that.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a lot.
Yeah, it's a big bill.
And what's the chance of this getting passed?
Well, there's always chance of parts of it getting passed this session. Obviously, well, maybe not obviously. I'll just say Democrats are not in the majority in the House. So we're always looking.
Close.
We are close. We are close. So we're always looking to see if there are parts of this that can go on to another bill that is moving. And I know from talking with other colleagues of mine, there's going to be more housing bills unrolled in the next few weeks. And we're hoping that we are going to be able to partner. But we wanted to plant a stake in the ground in this time when we're in the minority to say, once we're in the majority, everyone knows housing is a crisis. Let's put down some markers for how much money we really should be investing.
Good work, Becca.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got lots of questions. First off, any updates on the Windham Windsor Housing Trust Vermont accessory dwelling grants that are on hold and may be transferred from a federal program to the states?
I am looking at my staffer who does all housing. We don't have any additional information to share. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But we're making a note. We'll chase it down.
Wendy Harrison wants to say, you may be thinking of the VHIP program. Yes, you are thinking of the VHIP program, the ADU program. That is, which provides grants for private landlords to bring units up to code. And there's actually been some action in Vermont, in Brattleboro on that program, but we haven't been able to track down enough people to write a story about it. From Chris Hart. Hi, Becca. I applaud the inclusion of public housing in your bill and the removal of the fair cloth cap. I don't know what that is.
Yes, this is great.
You will explain it.
Yes, I will. We're very excited about it too. I was meeting with Matt Kent, who's on my staff. I have to just give him a shout out because he's worked so hard on this bill. And I asked him earlier, what are a couple of things that you're so excited about in this bill? And one of them was repealing fair cloth. So what that amendment said in 1999 was there was a federal cap placed on the development of new public housing. Essentially, yes, exactly. It's part of the reason we're in the mess that we're in right now. There was a cap put on how many units could be built. And so it's past time that we repeal that so that we have the opportunity in, as we are moving many levers at once here to make it possible once again to develop new public housing.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Public housing capital improvements have been severely underfunded by HUD for decades. This is Chris again. Yeah. Have you considered an additional infusion of capital money to housing authorities so they can address the significant need for improvements in their very old housing?
Yes, we have, and we know the need is there, and so really appreciate you making a plug for that. It is definitely on our list. So thank you.
Okay. Can you please ask the Congresswoman what is in her Community Housing Act to support new home ownership?
Okay, great. I really appreciate that. So a couple things. One, there's a lot to support home ownership. Now we're looking at the shared equity model in some aspects of the bill, so that you've got we're going to be putting $500 million in shared equity housing fund that we're going to establish. This doesn't exist yet at the federal level, and it will award grants to eligible nonprofits and HFAs to create, expand, and sustain shared equity home ownership. And so, do you understand when you have equity that is shared with a nonprofit, it means that for as long as you are in that home, you are able to have sort of a fixed price that you know that you're going to be paying. And then we want to keep that perpetually affordable over the long term. So there's a part in there about the shared equity model. There are also, we were talking earlier about Section 8. There's a part of Section 8 that has never really been fully actualized or funded, and that's the Section 8 down payment assistance program, so that you could use the Section 8 vouchers essentially to go towards not just rental, but home ownership finally, which is how it was envisioned when it was first created. Trying to think if there are other pieces on this. The bill is so big. We're also, one thing that's particular to Vermont, we asked to increase the small state minimum that goes to Vermont from $3 to $6 million, so that we will have more money flowing to our partners like Windham Windsor Housing, Champlain Housing Trust. So we're constantly looking at both programs that exist now that are not fully funded, or where we can make a tweak in a program to make it work more for Vermont.
Okay. You ready for another one?
Yeah, the one other thing my team is reminding me of is that we also have, we want to permanently authorize the USDA Multifamily Preservation and Revitalization Program. This makes it possible for owners of houses that are multi-unit houses in rural areas to refinance and make it possible for them to stay in the business, both of being an owner-occupied residence, but also to make sure that we have those units, available for other renters in rural areas. And there is also a Section 521 in the USDA rental assistance in the USDA. It is making it possible for rural renters to stay in their homes. We want to reauthorize this program because it's up to expire.
Ooh. Okay. From Chris Campany, thanks for your work in DC on housing, Becca. Just want to note that a key issue to developing the quantity of housing that is needed today and into the future is public wastewater and water infrastructure. It is only in these communities that have it or develop it, and importantly, that have it in the areas where housing development is possible, including out of areas at risk of flooding, where housing units in the numbers needed is possible.
I agree, Chris. Actually, was just talking with my Vermont staff about that last week when they came down here, and Carolyn Westland and I had a talk about wastewater and about making sure that that doesn't fall off our radar screen in terms of infrastructure investments that are needed, again, at the federal level. These are the kind of investments that were made to build, you and I have talked about this, to build the suburbs. Essentially, we need that same level of investment in rural America to upgrade water and sewer, because you're right, we can't support additional units without that happening.
One thing I remember when I was talking to Chris a while ago was his idea that we kind of access Hinsdale as Vermont East and put a pipe under the bridge and send the wastewater down to the Brattleboro treatment plant. I don't know if you want to kill me for saying that, Chris, or sounded good to me.
Yeah, the idea there is that the way the land lays over there is actually quite developable. It's not quite as steep. It's already impacted, already been developed. And actually, John Potter, we had a conversation with Brattleboro's town manager about having more conversations across the river. And it would be helpful also to have conversations across the river up in Bellows Falls and Walpole, especially North Walpole, because there are opportunities if we look beyond our borders to achieve this issue. Because we exchange roughly the same number of people each day with our neighboring states. So if you look at our area's economy and frankly where we can and should be developing housing, it'd be helpful if we did have more interstate discussions too, as well as intermunicipal discussions.
Yeah, and so Chris, as you and I know, the labor shed stretches from Bennington and over to Keene and down to Greenfield, Northampton. So since I've got you here, this is an interesting conversation. What kinds of agreements are you thinking about with Hinsdale or with across the river there at Bellows Falls? Because you're absolutely right. I mean, in some ways, we are part of the same housing community and labor community. So what could that look like?
But I think really it is just literally just getting the towns talking to each other about what the possibility might look like. Because as a planner, if you just look at even at the lay of the land and where it would make sense to develop housing, like, I think the Hinsdale dynamic is you've got a brand new bridge with a sidewalk going across it. You've got an existing bridge and island complex that make a fantastic pedestrian park. And then you've got the old railroad bridge. You've got 3 bridges going across.
Right.
Railroad bridge possibly might be able to carry wastewater. Who knows? I mean, the new one could too. But you've got the wastewater plant in almost immediate proximity across the river in Brattleboro. But if we start talking about more, not like Brattleboro's got theirs, Hinsdale,
Right.
but more, how would this make sense? Even just from a basic objective planning, without the politics, to start looking at what might that look like? Where might we be able to better accommodate large quantities of housing, and what would it take to support that? And how could it benefit both sides? I mean, to Mama, and it'd be a similar conversation up in Rockingham and Walpole. I think it's just starting to have the conversation first. Designing anything, just like what are the possibilities, and that's the general idea. I don't know if it'd work or not, and of course,
I really appreciate.
It's just a concept, we make no decisions. But.
Well, the thing is, as we know, we are limited in places like Brattleboro in terms of where there's buildable land left, right? And certainly, we haven't even talked about what happened this summer with all the flooding and how we know our low-lying areas are going to continue to flood. I certainly have seen all of the work that's doing down along William Street to try to prevent flooding in the future. But we do need to think more broadly. And it reminds me that I should be in touch with our New Hampshire House members too, Annie Custer and Chris Pappas, and talk to them about, what could be included in a bill like this to make it easier for multi-state partnerships. I love that you're thinking about that.
Great. Okay, let's thank you, Chris. That was great. Another question. A key issue in small rural communities is lack of infrastructure to make housing development possible. That just piggybacks right on what we're talking about. In Marlboro, the Planning Commission got approval for a village district and got a grant to study the feasibility of a community septic, but the town has no way to implement the plan. Will your bill help?
So no way to implement the plan because of capacity, because of money, just so I understand.
Edith, you want to kick in here?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't unmute before. This is Edie. It has to do with money. And not knowing how to apply for grants or whatever. It's a piece of property that's very feasible to do a community septic.
Okay.
And what's preventing the village from being able to build at all, and especially affordable housing.
And so do you have a price tag on that or ballpark?
Yes, but I can't tell you right now.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I think it would be great. And we can put all the information in the chat before we leave about how to, contact my office. The other thing about this bill is that many of the mechanisms for sending money to the states can be made quite flexible, and so could be used for something like this in the future that perhaps isn't the housing itself, but makes it possible to build more housing because, as Chris talked about earlier, needing more water, sewer, or septic. So we're noodling over that here, and I really appreciate that.
Right. I mean, the concept is, you can't, which we have approached Windsor Housing or anyone if you don't have any infrastructure, because they're not going to do that, and they can't.
Absolutely, and
It prevents anything else from happening.
Right, and for a town the size of Marlboro, it's a very heavy lift financially to try to do that without support from the federal government. So the other piece that I'm thinking about is whether there's anything within the Green New Deal that was passed. I'm gonna flag for me to follow up with Ed Markey's staff in the Senate, looking at if there might be some money tucked in there. So let's definitely have you or someone else who's been part of this process be in touch with my staff. Appreciate it.
Okay, great. What are the possibilities for securing funding for people with old homes and low incomes to make these houses more resilient to climate change? Not necessarily to provide more housing, though that's possible too, but just to be able to stay in our homes.
Yes, so there are a couple of things in here. I'm really glad that you mentioned that. We know that part of the challenge in these older homes in Vermont is that we need, just going for my notes here. We need to be able to do rehab and refurbishing to be able to stay in homes. And I know for some older Vermonters who would like to be on one level, there aren't a lot of houses right now available on one level. So you're trying to make it work within the home that you've got. And so this bill provides grants for nonprofit developers to work with authorities to rehab old housing stock for affordable units. And it's not directly referenced to my bill, but I do support more work to weatherize. There are other bills moving through Congress that are specifically geared at weatherizing. I know that's a really important aspect of this. And I know Wendy Harrison, who was on earlier, we have had a rehab program through the state as well. I don't know if that's still being funded. I don't know if Wendy's still on the call. I think it would be helpful to know those provide direct assistance to be able to do that rehabbing.
Yes, I am here. Thank you, Becca, for all you're doing. And I just love the units. The billions would just make such an incredible difference.
Yes, not millions, but billions.
Yes. Yes, that program is still in effect, the VHIP program. I know that you know it well. It's on pause now because we're switching between VHIP 1 and VHIP 2, and the amount per unit will be expanded, and what folks can use the money for will also be expanded, and it should be ready to go in the next couple of weeks. So thanks for everyone's patience.
Wendy, could we have just a slight explanation of VHIP? We don't want to get too into the jargon here.
Sure. Sorry. It's Vermont Housing Improvement Program, and it's a program that provides grants between $30,000 and $50,000 to private homeowners for the purpose of bringing apartment units up to code primarily. And then there are some incentives to rent to folks getting out of incarceration and those kinds of things. But it's a really effective program. And in terms of cost, when the state gave us an update on the price we were getting updated units with an average cost of $36,000 per unit, which is a tenth of the cost to the public sector when we do other types of housing. So it's a really important part of the puzzle. We won't get everywhere because with this, because it's one unit at a time, but it does preserve the character of the community too, especially when it's used in the historic downtowns.
Joyce, can you do me a favor? Can you read the question again, just so that I make sure I have all the details
Which question was that?
about staying in the home, rehabbing?
Because I'm trying to deal with
Oh,
a
that's
whole
fine.
questions. That was the Marlboro question, and before that was Chris. We got that.
Okay.
And the next question is, how will this legislation help the Winston Prouty mixed income and mixed use neighborhood proposed for Brattleboro or other housing production that meets the needs of moderate to middle income households? But that's not the question you're asking about. So no, I can't help you. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's all right. One other thing before I speak to that question, because I'm not sure if I mentioned it in the introduction or not, but a real thrust of this is to make sure we keep people in their homes, and we want to make the ERAP program, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, permanent. We know that it's much more difficult once people lose their housing to get them rehoused, and it's horrible for the emotional life of that person and their family. What we want is direct assistance to people to be able to stay housed. And so what I'm hearing from that previous question is there may be also an aspect of this that is about individual homeowners who are elderly, cannot move to a one-level house. Yeah, Joyce, yeah, you're like, yeah, I'm looking at you, kid. Is there an opportunity to have some other part of the bill?
Yes, elevators. Just bring elevators.
Yeah, that is what
Bill, you could call it the Joyce Marcel Amendment.
Okay, I love it. And so they were just asking me about the Winston Prouty.
Yeah.
I know that
it again, or did you get it?
Well, no, I think I got it. And
Okay,
the short answer is this. I am in constant communication with Chloe Leary about.
She's on this call, by the way.
Yes. And actually invited her down for the State of the Union because of her really innovative approach. And so we're going to continue to try to find, whatever support that we can for that particular project. We're focused in this most specifically on the issue of affordable and deeply affordable housing, because we know that the housing market is the whole market. And when you increase units in any part of the market, it helps everybody within the market. And we know from the homelessness crisis in Vermont that we do need more affordable and deeply affordable. And yes, and more market rate. And I've seen the plans for Prouty. It's very exciting, and we're gonna stay in close contact to see if there's a way that we can help.
Okay. Now we're going on back to old homes. What are the possibilities for securing funding for people with old homes and low incomes to make these houses more resilient to climate change? Not necessarily to provide more housing, though that's possible too, but just to be able to stay in our homes.
Yeah, so that's
covered that, but let's do it again a little.
Yes. So there isn't anything specifically in here related to climate adaptation, though that's incredibly important. And what is one of the best parts of this bill, in fact, with the Housing Trust Fund, is that the grants that go to states are incredibly flexible, both for the Housing Trust Fund, for the Capital Management Fund, a bunch of these programs, there is flexibility that states have. So it could be that within that, the state could create a mechanism for just that. But I do know that in terms of dealing with climate change and weatherization, that is definitely something that's going to be dealt with more in some of the other bills that my colleagues are introducing. We were really focused on low and deeply affordable housing because we know that there's an incredible need. But I'm hearing from this gathering tonight how many people are in homes that really aren't meeting their needs. And certainly as I think about it in my house, we did a whole lot of work re-insulating the house because we felt like all the heat was just going right out all the poor seals on the windows and most of Vermont is like this. We have a lot of old housing stock, and I'm seeing based on this call that there's a need for another program specifically geared towards that.
We also are in the middle of climate change as well, although not as drastic as California, and we're not on fire, but we have a lot of water damage, a lot of trees falling down, a lot of power lines, a lot of power lost. The climate change is affecting Vermont.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We saw
not
that.
only flooding, it's people who are, well, we are everywhere.
Yes. And there are people who are moving to Vermont because they're trying to escape the wildfires. And
yeah,
I've met a number of these people. And so it is, as you say, it's not coming, it's already here.
Right. And a lot of people are moving here because we have water and they have drought, but we may have too much water in a couple of years. And we're all learning how to deal with this. Okay, here's a good question that I would ask myself if I hadn't thought of it. Please talk about the problems caused by the need for housing, the labor required to produce the housing, and the need for education to build and renovate housing to meet energy standards. And I'll add on to that the fact that finding a plumber, finding a carpenter, finding somebody to do work on your house is incredibly difficult right now.
Yes, we're caught in this terrible cycle. And I talk to employers in every industry across the state saying that they are, they're short labor, but they can't bring people in because there isn't housing available. And so I completely understand it's very difficult to get a plumber or an electrician, absolutely. And yet these are really great jobs, and we need to be training young people who are interested in these jobs. But you're right, it's completely connected that the housing stock isn't there. And I was just talking with an employer up in Chittenden County. They did a final, set of interviews with somebody who was very excited to move here to work on a very exciting technology project, and there was no housing, so they decided to go elsewhere. And so it's high end, it is service workers, it's across the spectrum. I know I've heard that from restaurants across the state as well, that they're
I had that conversation with the director of Brattleboro Memorial Hospital the other day.
Yes.
Doctors, nurses, phlebotomists, same thing.
Exactly.
Okay. Someone named Anna Marie says, it's very exciting. Thanks for all the work. 3 exclamation points. And then Margaret says, hi, everyone. Thank you for having these forums. Families whose incomes are above the many low-income programs needs to be addressed. Joyce mentioned the boomers. There are many of us with houses that could sell in a matter of days, but where would we go? Exactly. Some communities have tiny homes for seniors with public transportation nearby as needed. If you want rural areas to increase housing, water and sewer for many towns are needed.
Yep.
That covers the whole thing.
Yes. I think. And so I have a question for folks generally. One of the struggles that we've had in Vermont for years in trying to build new housing is that when it comes right down to it, people don't want more land developed to build more housing. And I'm wondering how that may be showing up in Windham County and how that impacts this conversation.
What are you saying exactly?
What I'm saying,
Downtown, you mean, or out here in the boondocks?
well, I'm saying I travel around the state, and everywhere I go, people say we need more housing. And almost in the same breath, they say, yeah, but I don't want it here.
Well, that's the NIMBY problem.
And I'm wondering if it's shifting. That's what I want to know. And Chris Campany, is that shifting?
Chris?
I don't think so. Because the conversations I have with individuals and, in meetings with towns and others, you'll hear, the same simultaneously, the cry for the need for housing, but we don't know who will move in there if we build this housing. And it might be people that are going to bring problems with them that we don't have. And this is not unique to Vermont. I've experienced it in every state where I've worked, which is a few, and every jurisdiction. And there's so much fear over change and not knowing who might move in that people will then kind of sabotage the availability of homes for themselves, for their children, for their parents, for their neighbors. I'm not 100% sure how you get over that, because even as acute as the need is now, while I'm hearing a lot more conversation about, or just a sheer recognition about the need for housing, I'm not necessarily seeing the aggressive action that needs to be taken, especially at the municipal level, to make it possible. With the exception, one of the exceptions though is Brattleboro probably has been one of the best municipalities in the state as far as trying to, get their rules and regs up to date, really looking at the infrastructure issues, really kind of leaning forward and thinking ahead. So there's actually a great model there. But one of the unique things about Brattleboro, of course, is they actually have dedicated professional planning staff to work on this stuff all the time.
Yes, and we know that that is an issue, obviously, for smaller towns, that they don't have a dedicated staff for that. I think we have to make this connection for people that if you want to have a thriving downtown, you need people to be able to work and to live there, because it's funny, whenever I go out with my kids and we try to grab food downtown, they're like, why is it taking so long? I was like, because everybody has a workforce crisis and they're working as hard as they can. And we hear that across the board. The other thing I wanted to say is that I know it's sort of hard to wrap your head around it, but really adding more affordable housing benefits mid and the high end income folks too. Just adding more housing to the housing market helps at all levels. And the bill does also support mixed income developments. And that is, one of the things that they're trying to do at Winston Prouty as well.
Okay, I'm going to move on because we have a lot of questions and may be running out of time. Becca, I remember you coming to Newfane Town Meeting years ago and talking about housing long before it seemed to be on anyone else's radar. This is from Deb Luskin. So it's great to have you in Washington working on this issue. My question is, does the housing bill include any provision for transportation that does not rely on private cars?
It doesn't, but we know that this is a real need. And it's one of the things that we constantly come up against in trying to do any kind of work in rural America is looking at transportation. I will sit with my staff about that as we regroup and do a debrief on this. I know that it is something that is needed, and it is there. We don't specifically deal with that issue, that we're looking through. Oh, so we're looking at all the letters and bills and caucuses that I've signed on to specifically around transportation. The other thing, it's not specifically around transportation in this bill, but it is about changing the way we think about parking minimums as it relates to housing. We know that has been a barrier. And so we are thinking about using space in a different way when it comes to cars, because that can prevent more housing from being built. But you're right, the transportation piece is critical here as well. And I'm curious, Deborah, whether you have any ideas about what that could look like.
Well, that would be great if she sends them to you. Christine Hart says, just an FYI for all, the number of those over the age of 70 in Windham County is projected to more than double, over 4,000 people between 2020 and 2040. Wyndham Aging is working on advocating for housing for this coming wave of seniors. Yes, well, Chris, we're hoping that once Becca goes, we can hear from you about that. I'm interested in that, certainly.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I don't think my staff has talked yet with Wyndham Aging, but I think that would be a really fruitful discussion for my staff to have, because this is a real concern. And as Deborah said earlier, I have been talking about this for a long time, and I've been very concerned about the issue of seniors needing other housing supports, other housing that works for them, and there's nowhere for them to go. They want to get rid of their big rambly house that is drafty, and they're spending so much money on the heat, but there's literally nowhere to make that lateral move. So I've flagged that for Matt, and we'll follow up with Wyndham Aging.
Yeah, that's a very important one, she says.
And can I have that statistic one more time?
Sure.
Because it was quite sobering.
The number of those over the age of 70 in Windham County is projected to more than double, over 4,000 people between 2020 and 2040. Wow. Okay, moving on. We have the Rich Earth people saying, in response to the wastewater question, our region has the good fortune to have additional expertise about the most promising innovations in wastewater. Rich Earth Institute and Brightwater Tools work locally, but also nationally and internationally. Our technologies are going to Europe first because they are ahead of the US, but Vermont housing could be facilitated by one of the solutions that we're aware of. Some of those solutions, we represent the technologies being developed in other places. And what they're talking about, in case people don't know, is reclaiming urine and using it for fertilizer. That they've had very great success with that on farms here. So,
and it is diverting that out of the waste stream as well. Hello to my friends at Rich Earth. You guys do an incredible job, and I really appreciate you putting a plug in, because as we think about housing in the future, you're right, that needs to be a component of the way that we think about waste as it relates to housing as well.
Okay, next question. I am concerned about how much of the money in the act may be targeted towards helping people pay landlords instead of helping our in-demand workforce to build equity. Can you give some rough percentages about how much money in the act would go to building equity in owner-occupied through purchase or improvement landlords and contractors?
Yeah, so the rental assistance program is not a significant. I mean, there is a significant amount of money in here, but when we're connected to the rest of the bill, it's not. So the rental assistance program is an investment. Again, remember, it's federally $3 billion over 5 years, where you look at the amount of investments that we're putting into the Housing Trust Fund, the Capital Management Fund, and Home Investment Partnership. We're talking about nearly $500 billion. And so I understand there's this tension between, wanting to have a direct assistance program for people to be able to stay housed. That's critically important. We have a homelessness problem. We know that people get better health outcomes when they have a roof over their head. So it was important for us to have an aspect of this that is about giving people an opportunity when they're in dire straits to stay housed. That's a better option. But no, the bulk of the bill is actually investments in this shared equity model, so people can build up equity. I think it's really important that we are thinking about people having over time the opportunity to build wealth and not just to be paying rent. I understand. So it is a big part of the bill.
Okay. Becca, we are almost out of time, and I've got 19 new messages. So I'm just going to throw one out here. This is from Meg Mott. Could it be that your bill might get Republican support? There are Republicans in Congress who have expressed concern for affordable housing in rural areas.
Yes, and actually, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I am part of I do a lot of bipartisan work. One of the caucuses that I'm part of is the Bipartisan Rural Healthcare Caucus. And our last conversation in the caucus, I brought up the issue of that housing actually is a kind of healthcare, that we know that we cannot have great healthcare outcomes for individuals and families if they're not safely and securely housed. And so I do think there's a lot of opportunity. And I actually was talking with the ranking member on the committee that specifically deals with housing and some of the other longtime members of that committee. And they said, yes, that this is something that cuts across every congressional district. And there is an opportunity. And, I'll just be honest, I think the opportunity is going to come hopefully when we flip the House, because what we saw when Biden had the House of Representatives, we were able to make an infrastructure bill that was, billions of dollars of investments. I think we need to do a similar thing for housing, and I think we will bring some Republicans along.
Excellent news. Good work. Okay, one more question, and I'm afraid they're going to take you away, whether I want you to go or not.
That's generally how it works, yes.
Do all these bills take Vermont residency into consideration? I am concerned about the LLCs and out-of-state county entities that are buying up properties and investments to provide STRs, short-term rentals, I guess, for tourists, rather than using these homes properties for Vermont residents and families.
Right. So remember, a lot of this is going to organizations in the state and state government that understand where their money needs to go. This is not going to be used to fund conglomerates coming in to buy up housing. In fact, I don't know if you were on the call earlier, we have a part of the bill that is dealing specifically with price fixing in this situation with multinationals buying housing. So we are also doing something that you'll be interested in, a study on the practicality and the economic effects of taxing specifically second homes and having a federal fund that is fed into for creating more housing for others by taxing second homes. So that is a part that I know a lot of Vermonters are excited about. It may not be a part that my Republican colleagues are excited about, but we're always looking for an opportunity to have a fixed funding stream. And I think there's a case to be made that if somebody has two homes, perhaps they should be paying into a fund to help others have one. Just saying.
That's a quote you could embroider on a pillow, Becca.
Yes.
Okay, well,
I wish we had more time, but I do need to go. Joyce, thank you for hosting me. Again, I want to say I really appreciate the feedback. We've been taking notes over here. It's a work in progress, and I'm working with many members of Congress who also are working on housing. We know this is one of the most important issues for Vermonters. So thank you for the time. Thanks for the invitation.
Okay, are you seeing the chat over on your side? Any of you?
I don't have it open, but I can open it.
I think I'll try to get it sent to you so you can see the other questions.
Great. And I wanted to give folks my Burlington office number.
Please.
So it's 802-652-2450. Once again, 802-652-2450.
Fine. Thanks so much, Becca. And
thank you. Thanks for joining me, everybody. Thank you.
And remember that we are going to continue for another half hour after we lose Becca. So hang in there. Well, the next part of this discussion, which is just going to carry on, we're going to talk to Chris Campany. We're going to talk to Chris Hart, who has actually built senior housing in Brattleboro. A miracle, if ever I heard one. And Sue Fillion. Are we here, Sue?
I'm here.
Explain to us about Brattleboro and exactly why we're so far ahead. That would be interesting to hear. And we also have Josh Van Nest, who does modular housing and has some interesting things to say about that. So let's start with Chris. You probably said everything you were going to say. Do you have anything else?
Well, Joyce introduced Craig too. Craig was also key to read
Oh,
about.
Craig, I'm sorry.
So the great panel that you guys have pulled here, myself excluded, but I mean, you've got, you have some real stars here, not just the Brattleboro area, but within the state of Vermont, what all these people are doing, what they've done, and the innovations that they're doing, and everywhere that they've worked, whether it's the housing authority, whether it's redevelopment of property and work that Craig has done, whether it's innovation and cost savings and efficiency that Jason's doing, the forward-looking work that the Brattleboro Planning Department has been doing. It's really important. And I would say also the Commons, the fact that you guys are still here and supporting this is awesome. So just from where I sit, so Windham Regional Commission, we help, we serve 27 towns in southeast Vermont. It's the 23 towns in Windham County, Reedsboro, Searsburg, and Winhall in Bennington County, and Weston and Windsor County. And we assist towns and effective local governments in collaboration and collaborate with them on regional issues. And I've worked in a number of other states, including Orange County, New York, in the wake of 9/11, Calvert County, Maryland, and I've also worked with the federal government in DC, and also Mississippi and Louisiana. One of the challenges we have in not only Vermont but New England is the fact that it requires these really small geographies, these tiny towns. By any measure, they're pretty small. Even Brattleboro, our biggest in our region, Brattleboro is the largest town with a population of around 12,000. Our smallest town is Somerset with a population of 6. It requires towns to really make a lot of major land use decisions, including whether or not to have a town plan, whether or not to have zoning, and whether or not to do things like infrastructure investment or investing in the infrastructure they've already got. And this requires a lot of political and operational capacity that, a lot of these towns don't really have a strong tradition of doing. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not that they've done anything wrong. It's that, they've always, a lot of them focused on roads and those kinds of decisions, not necessarily how do we develop housing. And it's also really difficult to plan for housing in these small geographies when it may actually make more sense because of the size of a neighboring village or something else to actually have more housing in the town next to you, as opposed to your town, not to kind of push it away, but just because of topography, infrastructure, existing built environment, like the whatever the nature of their village might be. So, and just to be clear, the number of units that we're talking about, and Sue can get into the housing study that they did, which looked at in 2021, Sue, or I'll let you get into it, but there's over 500 units needed right now. Londonderry did a housing study that said they need more than 300 units right now. We're talking several hundred units just in this region alone. And so we really need to talk about housing at a substantial scale, a scale that creates efficiencies that drive down cost, and a scale that actually achieves the housing numbers that we need. And the availability of public wastewater and water is a primary factor in determining where housing can be built. And at the volume that's needed. I was going to share an image with folk. Okay, so this is a map that shows throughout the state, these are basically village centers and downtowns, where we have no community water and sewer, which is red. Yellow is where you have sewer only, blue where you have water only, and green where you have water and sewer. And to really achieve the scale and sizable number of housing units that we need, it's really only where those green dots exist. And if you just have wastewater, that can help, but you're going to really need a community water system too. So in southeast Vermont, we're really talking Reesboro, Wilmington, Brattleboro, West Brattleboro, Algiers Village, Putney, Bellows Falls, and Saxons River. And all those red dots that you see in the West River Valley Route 30 corridor and also the Route 100 corridor, those are amazing village centers that are really walkable, bikeable, desirable places to live, but it's really hard to add many dwelling units, if any, to those villages at all. The other challenge that we've got as a state is that because a lot of the money is of federal origin, there's this kind of perverse system where we make towns compete for these funds. So first they have to have the ability to compete, and they have to have the ability to administer the grants to do like wastewater and water systems planning. To my mind, it'd be a lot better that if a town decides, and it's a really not an easy decision for towns to make, but if a town decides they want to pursue this, man, just as a state, we should just have the engineering and design function ready to go to just do it, as opposed to them having to compete for a series of grants to have that done. I think it'd make it a lot easier. So one of the things I'd like to talk to Becca about, is there a way to make the EPA and other federal grant funds that ultimately come to the state easier for towns to use? And the other thing too is that the EPA wastewater grants that some of our towns like Londonderry is really led on this, Jamaica, Grafton. One of the issues is that these new wastewater systems that some of these towns are looking at implementing, they can only support what's already there. They can't support the actual smart growth. Like, how do you grow new housing units in like a more of a neighborhood setting, and ideally away and out of harm's way for flooding? Again, how do you actually increase the number of units in the community? And then last but not least, what we already talked about is, in cases where it makes sense, having more cross-border conversations, not only interstate, but also intermunicipal conversations. We're actually supporting it. We're working with UMass Amherst and the American Institute of Architects, Communities by Design Foundation, to work with 4 towns up in the northwest corner of our region, Winhall, Londonderry, Jamaica, and Weston, to just see what it would be like to have 4 towns collaborate on housing planning. And if that model works, then we'll replicate it elsewhere among groups of towns within the region. But that's my overview. Wow,
That's a lot. Okay, let's, just to save time, move on. Chris Hart, you're on. You want to talk a little about maybe the aging, how that's aging housing and how that's going? Or
Sure, I'm happy to talk about Windham Aging. We're a collaborative, a community collaborative of people. There's about 20 of us that meet monthly, and we're focused on not just housing, but all of the issues of aging, transportation, all the things that people have brought up. There were a lot of questions in the chat that really are right in the wheelhouse of Windham Aging. So I would encourage everybody to go to our website and see what we're working on. It's very exciting, and it's really needed work. As I said, we're looking at this huge wave of elderly folks coming, and
we're not coming, we're here.
We're here, but where are we going to put all these people? Transportation, all of that is all part of this. And I thought I wanted to just echo Becca's comment about health and health determinants. And that's, of course, one of the big areas of Windham Aging is on health and healthy aging, health outcomes. And you can't do that if you don't have decent housing. I mean, you just have to. Transportation, we need housing for people to age in place, and that can be in an apartment, it can be in a facility. One of the things that we're advocating for in Windham County are more facility beds, so residential care, assisted living, nursing home, every level of facility. As you know, we've lost a lot of them in Windham County. And when my friends need that level of assistance, they have to leave town. They have to go to New Hampshire. And so while the state isn't really, excited about that and really is moving away from that housing, we are really advocating for it. And we're going to do more work to develop some pretty hard numbers around just how much of that we need. But we're going out and doing listening sessions throughout Windham County right now. They're fascinating. And one of the things, not a surprise, people are saying, we did one at Valley Cares, and they're saying, if they're full, where do I go? I live in Townsend, and I don't want to leave my friends. So there's an awful lot to it. It is going to be a pretty dire need. And we are mindful that when the elderly move, there's a waterfall. So I'm elderly, I leave my house hopefully can go to somebody that's younger, and that starts a whole movement in the housing stock that we have. And we need to have that movement, and we're not having it. So right now, people are not leaving their houses. And I had a great discussion with Elizabeth Bridgewater of Windham Windsor Housing Trust over their rehab work. And she said that one of the barriers is certainly the trades and those issues that were brought up. But an even bigger barrier is the psychological, mental, emotional issues that go with having to move. And it's really and I've seen this. I've seen it in the housing that we had. You can't dismiss it. It's very real. And if we don't have supports and services for seniors, both as they age in place, but also when they want to move or just make improvements, then they're not going to make them. We're just not going to be able to be there. So that's a little bit of a ramble, and I'm sorry, but Windham Aging has a great website where we're working hard on developing a vision in 2040 and really getting good, hard data about what do we need to prepare Windham County for this. We are and will be the second oldest county in the second oldest state in the country.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's very, very important, and everyone should check out the website. I'm only moving fast because we don't have much time and we want to get everybody to talk. So Sue Fillion, are you there?
I am. Thanks, Joyce.
Tell me about Brattleboro. Tell us about the best ahead of everybody else in the state, and it's still not working. What's going on?
Yeah, it was nice to hear that. I think sometimes in our department, we're not necessarily getting the word out enough about some of the changes that we've made to try to encourage housing development. We had this experience after Irene, working with Brattleboro Housing Partnerships, trying to find a site to relocate the housing from Melrose Terrace. And really, we're finding that our zoning regulations were presenting a lot of barriers. So we did a couple of things. I mean, things lined up in various ways. But when COVID started and there was a heightened need for housing people, we started looking at getting rid of our density standards in zoning districts that have water and sewer. So what that means is a lot of zoning, it's a little technical, but you might have 1 unit per 6,000 square feet. So if you had 7,000 square foot lot, you could only have 1 unit. You weren't going to get a second unit out of that. And so we realized that we had kind of all these artificial regulations that were kind of holding things back, when really what most people were concerned about was the form of the housing. So whether it had 2 units in it, 4 units, it didn't really matter, as long as the kind of the pattern of development was the same for the neighborhood. That was kind of okay. So as an emergency interim zoning during the COVID emergency, we actually got rid of that. The select board did. They were very supportive of it. That was one of the first changes, and that we went along with that for a couple of years, and we're like, the sky didn't fall, so let's go further. We were able to take advantage of a bylaw modernization grant from the state of Vermont, and they still have those grants available annually, to really take a deeper dive into our zoning regulations and figure out where were the barriers to housing development. And we did some different things. We kind of were ahead of some of the state statute changes that were making it easier as well. We have, we treat 1 unit to 5 units as a permitted use. So we're reducing regulatory review, making it a little bit more certain for developers, particularly in this case, probably small scale developers, kind of the people wanting to build extra units in a neighborhood or something like that. But at the same time, we realized that we had a lot of, we were projecting a lot of things that people should be living with. If it was a big apartment block, everyone had to have their private space, whether it was a deck or a patio, and realizing that, those are niceties. They're not necessarily necessities when we have so many people that need to be housed, and they bring additional cost to a project. So we removed a lot of those. And then we also had a new missing middle housing overlay district where you could have up to 9 units. This was really trying to promote a certain type of housing, whether it was garden apartments, townhomes, things that we weren't really seeing a lot of development on. 5 units in a house on High Street or something like that, making it really easy to do that. And our zoning regulations were passed by the select board last summer, and we actually had our first application for a missing middle housing project, which is nine townhomes. We actually think they're going to do an additional 3. We've been advocating for Act 250 reform. We're pleased to see some of what's coming out of the legislature. We think that, in areas like downtown Brattleboro, there's a lot of redundant review. So we're really supportive of trying to find pathways to make Act 250 easier for developers. And we're taking advantage of the different state designation programs. Village Center, we have the downtown designation, and we have the neighborhood designation area. We worked to expand that to include the Winston Prouty campus and also around West Brattleboro Village, so that certain development projects can have some of the benefits that come with those projects. So that's been really good. And then as a community, there's a real acknowledgement that housing is a big problem. I didn't mention it at the beginning, but we had done a housing action plan in 2021, and that identified a conservative need for 517 housing units, half rental, half single family. Could easily be up to 700, the demand. And so with discussions with the ARPA funds that the town of Brattleboro received, there was a lot of community support towards putting some of it towards housing. And so the select board is thinking of actually not using the ARPA funding, but we have another source of funding, dedicating some funds to that. And we're doing some work to identify town-owned lands and do some pre-development planning so that we can make those available to developers and reduce their upfront planning costs. So there's more that we can do, but we're interested in looking into parking reform. How can we get more housing on Putney Road, and doing more outreach with property owners? But we're pretty excited with what we're doing so far.
Wow, I had no idea. I think we should do a story in the Commons on that. That was very impressive.
Thank you.
Okay, just to move along, and I apologize to everyone because you have so many interesting things to say. But Craig, can we get you into this conversation? I apologize for it being so late.
Not at all. I'll ask BCTV to pull up the one slide that I had, and I will be pithy and maybe provocative. What housing crisis? This is our population in 2007. And we had about 300 and some thousand people. And that is, I'm sorry, we had about 600 and some thousand people in 2007. That's the blue line on top. And 15 years later, we had, 600 and some thousand people. We have a very small increase as a percentage in our number of Vermonters. And our housing stock has grown at a similar, albeit small percentage. So why does it feel like our housing crisis is so acute? And the answer is because we have a workforce housing crisis. Fewer Vermonters are in the workforce now than were immediately prior to COVID. There's a couple of reasons for that, primarily because the folks who left the workforce were the older Vermonters that we talked about, the seniors, the boomers. So those folks left, and contrary to public opinion, Vermonters tend to stay in Vermont and stay in those houses, and those houses don't produce labor anymore. In Vermont, I'm happy that Vermont seniors want to stay in Vermont, but they stay in those houses, and those houses don't produce labor. And so we went from the highest workforce participation rate really in the country just prior to COVID, now to a significantly under the median value for the entire state. So we have a workforce problem, workforce housing problem. And I would advocate that that's where we should focus our efforts, that we should find ways to build workforce housing. And as Chris said, what does workforce housing look like? Well, when I was 22 years old, I lived in an apartment building. It was cheap, it was efficient, and it was built at scale. So Vermonters are, if we want to, have people to work in our places and have businesses to tax to generate our revenue, we're going to have to build the housing for the people who are going to work in Vermont, which means our population is going to grow because we're going to import labor, and we're going to have places for those people to live. And that is antithetical to a whole bunch of Vermonters' idea of what Vermont is, that we need to stop getting bigger, we need to stop building houses, and we need to be exactly what we are. The problem is we just got old, and we need to bring young people in, or we need to move the old people out, or we need to build new housing. So I guess in sum, we either need to move old people out of Vermont, or we need to build housing for new people. That's it.
You can move me anywhere you want. Oh boy, we have to really unpack that one. Sue, you want to take it?
I don't want to touch that one. We need housing. We do need all types of housing. I will say that. So, low income or affordable, very affordable housing, middle income housing. We need it all.
Yeah, all housing is homeless housing. All housing is workforce housing. All housing is reducing the stress on the system. Right? Senior housing is fantastic. As Chris said, you build senior housing, you move folks out of big old 5-bedroom houses in Brattleboro into 1-bedroom senior housing apartments. You've just created, with one apartment, you've created 5 new bedrooms. We need to build all kinds of housing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, and just because we're running out of time completely, Jason, I hate to leave you for 3 minutes to talk, but do you want to tell us a little bit about modular housing?
Sure, I'd love to. It's a pleasure to join sharp minds like Craig and Sue on this panel.
You know, Sue and her staff, like Brian Bannon, are really outstanding in what they do. And Craig has been a quite very helpful bit of I'd say legal mentorship. Christine and Chris, it's a pleasure to join you as well. I'm joining you from downtown on Main Street in Brattleboro, Logic Building Systems. And we are laser focused on driving down the cost of building affordable housing. We wholeheartedly agree with assessments like Craig's and Sue's that it's great that Becca's bill is creating huge investments to increase the supply of housing, but let's make those dollars go as absolutely fast and absolutely sufficiently as possible. When you look around at our colleagues around the globe and you ask who's not in a housing crisis right now, 2 population centers, one in Northern Europe and one in Southeast Asia, really stand out. And what they've done over the last 50 years is they've adopted offsite construction practices. They're building literally modular components of housing in offsite factories, things like bathrooms and kitchens. And they're very efficiently transporting them to job sites to plug in. So what I'd like to just tell you in about 2 minutes is about 2 projects we're running right here out of the laboratory in Logic Building Systems. The first is I joined you as a tenured professor at New York Tech, where I run the Center for Offsite Housing, and we are promoting and even drafting the first standards for how modular kitchens and bathrooms would plug into a host building. If you think about what USB standards, the USB plugs did for computer peripherals in the 90s and aughts, standardizing how we put in, thumb drives, hard drives, printers, and what else. We can do the same thing for how we build housing, in especially low-income housing and affordable housing in America. Logic is a proud partner of the New York Tech Center for Offsite Housing and promoting those standards. The second thing we're doing right here in the laboratory is perfecting the first modules that will conform to those standards. So what we're doing here is creating essentially a kitchen in a box, a utility room in a box, and a bedroom in a box that act more like an appliance that you would plug in, say, the same way as a dishwasher into new and affordable apartments, condos, and multifamily housing. And so all are welcome to drop by and take a look at the prototyping we're doing here. But we're really trying to learn lessons about how to increase the supply of housing and to minimize the amount of on-site labor, which is the most expensive labor almost in our entire industrialized ecosystem here in America. By pushing connections into a controlled environment and minimizing the number of connections that we make on job sites, we get more efficient. We also get more green, driving 30% of waste out of dumpsters on job sites and driving 40 to 60% less CO2 to produce the same kitchens and bathrooms. We're very excited to share that vision with others. Please drop by anytime you'd like to discuss it more.
Jason, can you describe, this is a modular home in Maine. They are building a number of these homes, apparently, if this works, for homeless and low-income folks. And Jason, you can describe, it's something to do with cement, correct?
I don't know this particular project with specificity, but I do know that there's about 3 different ways that we're trying to introduce industrialized processes like the one we see here on the screen on a job site. 3D printing homes essentially takes a lot of the labor, the human labor, out of job site weather conditions and whatnot. You can set up a 3D printer, like I believe how this was made, to extrude. It's called rapid deposition printing, but to extrude thin layers of concrete. And you just need 1 or 2 laborers to put in formwork for the windows and doors. This is a major piece of making both sustainable housing because you can make nice thick walls with lots of insulation this way. But also, you can set that printer to go 48, 72 hours and realize a whole series of homes very efficiently. It's a piece of the puzzle with pieces of the production puzzle like Logic Building Systems dropping in
modular kitchens, bathrooms, and utility rooms to 3D printed site work like this. We really are all together driving down the cost of affordable housing. And that's really the thread that's been tying together so many of the questions we've seen today. It's not that we need to drive more money to drive up the supply of housing, but we have to get better at how we make housing. The way we make housing has essentially not been updated in 100 years, putting studs up and then pipes and electric. And if you think about the automotive history, the history of the automotive industry, it's had 2 revolutions in those 100 years. So we're really just updating, with all these examples, how to update a 100-year-old means of production.
David Newmeister, the number of young workers below 40 in Vermont is going down every year and will continue to decrease for the next 20 years at least. We need the BDCC and others supporting an immigrant push with housing for them. Agree.
Yeah, I mean, Lynn, that follows national averages. The construction industry is in a labor crunch, and we are essentially reaping the rewards of sending a majority of our young people over the last 30 or 40 years into white-collar jobs and undergraduate degrees and away from the trades. It's wonderful that Brattleboro specifically has a trade school attached to its high school, and we end up, unfortunately in Vermont, training some of New York City and Boston's best electricians, plumbers, and other tradespeople. They just, find incredible opportunities in urban centers. And so not only is David right that we face a long-term durable trend of fewer tradespeople serving our aging housing here in Vermont, but it creates a critical need to update the way that we realize and build housing with less labor. And I think, basic high school economics, when prices go up, it's because demand goes up and the supply is going down, is really what's driving a lot of what we find in Becca's legislation. And the response is up to us as a community.
I'm very interested in this conversation between Martha Gossage and Craig, that you're out of touch, Craig. I know you and I only know
not
you.
not the first time I've heard that, Joyce.
I'm not sure that I'm not surprised, but I didn't see that you were saying anything particularly unusual. It sounded very right on. What was the deal? Why does she say you're out of touch?
I don't know. I'll defer to Marta on that one. I will say, as a coincidence, I am the president of Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, and we believe that housing is economic development, and that we need to dedicate our focus and our resources toward adding to our housing stock in Windham County and in the communities that we serve. And if we build it, they will come, and actually they're probably already here, right? We see that in kind of substandard housing doubling up and other accommodations for the lack of housing in the community right now. So I think there is some labor that's in Brattleboro, and we need to find housing for those folks. There is, of course, some international immigration that could fill in some of the housing or the workforce demand that we have. And there's also domestic in-migration, especially from regions of New England that are more densely populated than Brattleboro, Windham County, and that have surplus labor, and folks could move up. And that would be great, right? Like having new, young folks move into the community to provide that labor and start their careers and their lives would be fantastic. That's how I arrived in Brattleboro now 20 some years ago. And I hope that we can continue to, open up that door and be welcoming to folks, because we need more people in Vermont. And maybe that's the part that's upsetting.
And Joyce, I'll just add, Craig is right. I think there are a number of younger workers here who are doubled up apartments, renting rooms and homes. But we got to move faster, because that, as appealing and lovely as Brattleboro and Vermont is, you're only going to rent a room in a house for so long in your late 20s, early 30s before you you say, I probably need to do something different. And that's where we really need to, we talk about new people, but just retaining the people we have, and appropriate housing for where they are in their life stage. And I'm afraid that as we look at the census going forward, we're going to see more people departing Vermont because of the lack of not only of affordable housing, but also just housing that's appropriate for age. And that's going to be older Vermonters too. It's going to be people who can afford to make that move.
I got fairly upset when I think it was the governor started saying that no, there aren't young people. Young people are moving out. No one. And then I started walking around downtown Brattleboro and asking young people, why are they here? I did that for over a year. And there are tons of young people here, young artists and musicians, music scene. They're waiting in restaurants. It seems to me like there are a lot of young people here. And are they in the West? I wouldn't know that, but I don't think you're off base, Craig, with what you're saying. I have somebody who wants to talk about tiny houses. Kim, are you there?
Yeah, hi Joyce. Thanks for calling me. This is Kim from Rich Earth Institute and Brightwater Tools, and I have a lot of young people that work with me, by the way. So I have a real sense of we are employing people who are trying to move here. I just want you all to know that in February we received our first container shipment from Australia, and here we are at Brightwater Tools being the U.S. distributor for a wonderful composting toilet that is specific to tiny houses. It's got a beautiful porcelain commode, and it has a 17.5-inch bin underneath that can be used. And at the same time, Rich Earth Institute has the country's first permit from our state regulators to do secondary composting of solids from toilets, which means that if you put a tiny house village together using these kinds of toilets, that we have the capacity to do the secondary composting at our site. And we already actually have 3 people using our service model to come and collect. So we have trucks to come and collect. And I'm just bringing that up because that's a very low impact solution. It's a different kind of scale of what people are used to in wastewater solutions. But I'm thinking we're going to sell a lot of those all over the country, these new tiny house toilets, and just to let people know that they're there.
Thank you. We have a lot of people thanking us for doing this. That's always gratifying. Lynn, I think you should take us out.
Okay, I think that's good. Thank you, everybody, for coming. If you like programs like this, and we do for sure, it would always help to get a little donation to go to our website, and $5 or $10, we'll take it. We'll take any of it, of course. We do have a lot of big ideas, and sometimes it takes a little cash, which we all know. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, our panel members. And look for us again for a special event in April on homelessness, and it'll be at the public library. And good night and good all. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you very, very much.